So welcome to Fridays at Noon. My name is Ken Pennock. I'm the Director of People Development here at the University of Denver. And today we're going to wrap up the series, 8 Simple Rules to Managing Conflict with Greg Geeson. And he is the manager of People Development, so welcome.
Thank
Greg,
you. Thank you.
Again, to see you. And we will be doing a wrap up of the 8 rules before this show ends. But today we're really focusing on Rule 8, which is empower the third side. And so again, welcome.
Thank
and
you.
I like your Leadership Academy, if you notice, his Leadership Academy shirt. So a plug for that program. So we just finished our second cohort. So we're pretty excited about that. So congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
So, as I mentioned, after today's show, you will have access to all 8 videos at the Fridays at Noon website as a part of the People Development website, I should say. And so the information is there, and I really encourage you to check that out. And I suppose a place to jump in is just, how would you recommend or want people to use these going forward on this issue of conflict?
Yeah, I mean, because we've got 8 videos, which was really over a span of maybe a year and a half that I think that we filmed all of these. Obviously, best case scenario would be to watch them from 1 to 8 to get the full impact of all 8, since they do play on each other. You certainly could selectively pick out the videos that apply to a given situation, and maybe only watch a couple of them and kind of see if those kind of help with that particular dynamic. And one way they'll be able to do that is certainly they can watch this one at the end to see the brief review of all 8 and to get a sense of that. Or of course we also have the articles for all 8 are going to be put together in one document, and anybody can email me and they can get the written version of these and then maybe decide which ones to watch. Another great idea is to do an in-service with their department or their team. And pick one of the videos and watch it and then discuss it as a group. I think that's a great way to do the conflict management with your intact team or your intact department and get the most out of it. And then the other thing I want to mention is that these videos apply to both personal and professional conflict, so they also relate to how to improve relationships in the workplace. So, for sure there should be some way that people can utilize these. And lastly, I guess I should jump in and just mention that, in the Colorado 14ers program, this taking the class 8 Simple Rules is one of the requirements, but in lieu of the class, people can watch the 8 videos and get credit for the class and not have to actually take the class.
So another option to access information, which, one thing I appreciate about the in-service idea for units that might do that, it's a great way to model that it's okay to talk about conflict, that it may happen, it has happened, and it's just a safe way to bring that out.
Well, and not only that, it's a proactive way to
proactive, that's right.
Most people don't address it till it's gotten too far, and then it's tense, and a lot of the damage has already been done by then. And, but if they would proactively do it, and maybe they could even tie it into the performance management goals as a group of watching this and discussing it, they'd get a lot out of it that way.
Well, and I can say personally, I think the rule that's been most helpful for me is the ladder. We'll do a quick review of that, but that one I have found very useful in my own world. So, but anyway, moving forward, what about Rule 8? What is this Rule 8?
So Rule 8 is called Empower the Third Side. And basically in conflict, there are 3 sides. Now let's say that you and I got into an intense conflict and our relationship deteriorated. Okay, so in that scenario, there would be your side of the conflict, there would be my side of the conflict, and then there'd be the third side, which is the impact our dynamic has on everybody that we impact. And that's what's called the third side. And according to William Ury, U-R-Y, who wrote Getting to Yes, one of the nationally renowned conflict authors.
Yes.
He created a book called the same name called The Third Side, actually. And in the book, he says that the people who are impacted, the third side, need to weigh in on the conflicts, play an active role in it, and essentially create a container so that if there is conflict within the group, that everybody else supports a constructive resolution and apply peer pressure in that dynamic so that the people in conflict have an incentive, an added incentive to resolve the conflict.
Interesting. That does reinforce research as well as just experience. When I've been working with units in conflict or people, is that it's the bystanders that are impacted.
Right.
And an extreme example is workplace bullying, where actually bystanders of the behavior will often be absent more often than the two people conducting the conflict of the bullying, which is another level of conflict, of course, but it's a significant...
Yes, which is very much kind of what this is about.
So I would imagine you have an example or a story.
I just happen
just
to
in
have
cases.
a story. I
would hope so.
Well, and like a lot of my favorite stories came out of when I did an Outward Bound excursion for 10 days, and this happens to be. I just got an email.
You're in demand on this.
Yeah. Well, this just happened to come from that scenario. So it was day 3 of a 10-day Outward Bound program with myself and 9 other people and an instructor named Christian. And we had all been hiking all day, wearing 60-pound packs. We were pretty exhausted. And there were 2 guys that really, the first 3 days were kind of snippy with each other. It wasn't like all-out conflict. It was just little barbs here and there. And, we all saw it. But, personally... I didn't notice it much. I didn't look for it. I ignored it. It had nothing to do with me, so I just kind of went on my way. And then, so that evening on the 3rd night, the instructor pulled us all together, like we're sitting in this like tribal council, like Survivor show in a circle, and he's like, he goes, you know what? We have a problem. And then he goes, no, wait a minute. You have a problem, and pointing to the whole group. And I'm like, what's up now? And he says, Jonathan and David have been bickering with each other for the better part of 3 days, and it needs to be resolved now.
And they were in that.
They were in the circle.
They were right there. So,
part of what he was doing is teaching us how to facilitate. That was part of what this Outward Bound workshop was about. But so all of a sudden it's kind of like tense. And I remember thinking, seriously, are we gonna have this conversation about their conflict? I've still felt like I had no part to do with this, and I was a little annoyed. And then a woman named Kelly said, she goes, but isn't it Jonathan and David's responsibility to solve? Which I think most people would say. Right. And Christian replied, he goes, yes, if they can solve it. He goes, but, and he's using this as a teaching moment. He goes, but when does it become a team problem? So people started thinking, and this guy named Jeff said, I guess if they can't resolve it, it's a team problem. And I remember being so annoyed at this moment that I said, their issue doesn't really involve me, so...
I can't imagine.
At which point, this is way before I got smart,
Right.
At which point I got all these looks from my teammates. So apparently that was not the right response. And then Christian, though, he was doing this on purpose to kind of bring up this debate. So he kind of welcomed this, banter back and forth. And he said, is it important to be a team while you are out here in the wilderness? Because we've got 7 days to go. And, one woman named Valerie goes, definitely, of course. And he goes, okay, tell me what it would look like to be a team. And by now, Jonathan, who's feeling very uncomfortable because he's part of the subject of this dynamic, decided to chime in as opposed to be the focus. And he said, well, we'd collaborate, we'd problem solve, we'd support one another, we'd help each other out, all that kind of stuff. And then Christian said, and what about trust? And then the other guy, David, who was in the conflict, said all those things Jonathan mentioned would create the trust. And he was also, I think, trying to downplay, get himself out of the limelight as well. And then Christian, he nodded and he said, okay, so let me see if I got this straight. So it's important for a team that needs to collaborate. So is it important for a team that needs to collaborate, problem solve, provide support, and trust each other to also be able to handle their own conflicts? And the group just kind of all together goes, well, yeah, of course.
Of course.
And he goes,
right.
then why the hell aren't you doing it? And we were all like kind of, whoa, like this is like serious. And he goes, Jonathan and David have been going at each other for the past 2 days, and all of you have been ignoring it, turning your back as if it's not your problem. He goes, well, guess what? It is your problem. And he goes, you're a team. When one member struggles, you all struggle. When 2 members are bickering, you're all bickering. He goes, every one of you is a reflection of this team and what this team stands for. When you're divided, you're not a team. And he concluded by saying, it's time to walk the talk. And this is kind of how he taught. It was a very powerful experience, needless to say. He goes, show me the collaboration, show me the problem solving, show me the support and trust right now. And I remember at that moment, like 2 things really stuck out for me. First off, I realized he was right, because I was as guilty as anybody about shrugging it off, that it wasn't my problem.
Right.
But the reality was it was happening under our watch. All of our watches, a conflict was occurring, and none of us were addressing it. And as a result, by all of us going, it's not my problem, we were enabling the dysfunction in our own team. And the second thing that stood out was, on a personal level, I really got at this moment that if I have a conflict with anybody in this group, I'm going to resolve it because I don't want it to come to this group intervention.
That's right.
Because that was really awkward. But I'll tell you, though, the truth was their bickering did impact the team. And, a lot of this was hindsight when I looked at it. But there was ongoing tension that was felt by everybody, by these 2. I mean, no one said anything, but it was there. We felt it. I felt it. There was a breakdown in communication between David and Jonathan, and as a result, there was a breakdown in communication in the team because we weren't all communicating. The team was divided, even if we didn't admit it. Those close to David versus those close to Jonathan, just kind of favored one or the other positions. And it also revealed that the team values were inconsistent, that we weren't applying them on ourselves. So to kind of make a long story short, so we did end up sitting there, talking it out very rapidly, I might add. And I think it's because we put a spotlight on it, and there was a real motivation on everybody's part to resolve this. And so we did right away.
One thing you said that I really noted as a manager myself is that leader that you had good courage, because on the one hand he really stayed back to see how you guys would do it. He didn't start inserting himself, but then he had the good courage to really confront the group and just be open about it. And I think I just think that's notable about that leader being able to do that. So exactly. Well then, similar to that situation, or is it possible to be neutral in a dysfunctional group or where there's conflict? If you're more than a bystander or you're not sure, what do you,
well, I can tell you what William Ury would say, the author of the book, and he would say no, that there is no middle ground, that you're either part of the solution or you're part of the problem, and that neutrality is the same thing as enabling the status quo, is giving approval to the dysfunction that currently is happening. But keep in mind, though, what I'm talking about here is not the conflicting issue itself, not the thing that those 2 were arguing over. It was more the dynamics of how they were handling it. You may care less about whether Jonathan or David was right or wrong or whatever the topic was. That's not really a third side issue. What a third side issue here is the relationship between the two of them, their lack of resolution around this, how it impacted how they treated each other as a result of it, and how it impacted the rest of the group. That is a third side issue.
Interesting. Kind of the more global view of it, and being able to recognize that. Do you have some other examples of this third side? Because this is an interesting aspect of it.
And it's way bigger. You got to remember William Murray. He mediates conflict between countries. I mean, he's like big time, right? But bring it down to a small scale. A boss that humiliates an employee in front of other employees, that's a third side dynamic, because everybody else watching it is the third side at that moment. A coworker bad mouthing another coworker, behind his back in the cafeteria, that's a third side issue, because who's ever listening to it, right then, they're the third side in that moment, and they're either supporting it or they're challenging it. A bystander who watches someone getting attacked, as you kind of referenced earlier, and does nothing, that's kind of a third side dynamic.
Interesting.
A parent going off at an umpire at a little league game, and all the other parents just sitting there embarrassed, that's a third side dynamic. Or even something as simple as a neighbor's dog barking all night and somebody calling the police instead of calling the neighbor. To do that is a third side dynamic as well, because the neighbor, obviously, with the dog, would be upset that nobody called them directly, but instead called the law enforcement.
So in a sense, that some of those examples, that third side wasn't leaning in, to use one of your terms earlier, into the conflict themselves,
they were
that
more
was
like, it's not
affecting
my
them.
problem, or I'm not going to handle it, and as a result, they reinforced it.
Yeah. So then, when that's occurring, what's the role of the department head, the division head, in our world, the department chair?
Yeah. Well, for one thing, best case scenarios, know a little bit about the third side concept, right? To empower the third side. What I mean by that is empower the group to step up and create whatever it is, ground rules or dynamics, or have a conversation around it. So there is an expectation that people have about your role as a third sider, let alone your role in the conflict if you're in that component. I would also say incorporate a performance evaluation measure that addresses team collaboration, support, and communication, because that's really where the third side can come out of. So there's accountability around bad expectation. And I would also say create and enforce consequences. For example, if a particular employee is the one gossiping or talking bad about another employee, is write them up or address it in a disciplinary way, so that they get and people see that there are consequences when people are, pulling the group apart that way.
Well, then, with respect, the rest of the department or the team or unit, even a project team, how do they address this third side or take it on?
And I think that's why, like, this particular video that we're shooting is a good in-service video, because you don't even need one of us there. You can show this video and then discuss the third side in a particular group or dynamic. But first off would be to talk about it. Have a conversation about what is the third side? What does that look like? What's the roles and responsibilities in the third side? You can incorporate that into a team building, certainly, or the team building could be the video or an in-service with the video. I think eventually what happens is teams create some expectations, some ground rules, some norms around should conflict occur. Your role is maybe you can listen to the person complaining, but then coach them in how to talk to the other person. And then if that doesn't work, then the group kind of takes over and goes, all right, kind of like Christian did, we've got a conflict, let's resolve it.
Let's do it.
That way. It's so uncomfortable that people are motivated to not be in that position. But it also is very powerful. And everybody needs to understand their role. So even if you think you're doing a nice thing by listening, if you're not also coaching in that listening, then you're doing a disservice to the whole group in that sense.
Well, you do have a tremendous amount of experience with this, and the have you ever encountered where the team or the third side feels perhaps the leader isn't or is ducking responsibility or shifting responsibility
Yeah.
when they may not be, but it certainly could be perceived like that?
Yeah, that does happen, and you know, in that scenario, well, first off, of course, the supervisor, if they knew about this third side and this video, for example, in a way, it would kind of assist them if they're not comfortable being a strong leader, because then they can create a third side around some of the dynamics, and it just kind of supports them. So there'd be an advantage to doing that. Sometimes a group might be able to say, well, you know what, we're not getting guidance here. Why don't we create a third side, a constructive third side, and maybe do it themselves, and then the leader can just kind of find a way to support that process and vice versa. But either way, it's really kind of important for the leader to support the third side, and it only helps the leader. It's to their advantage to certainly look into this.
And being aware of this actually can put the leader, the manager, the director in a stronger position, because again, they can model this and just speak about it up front, that they know there's this dynamic like with this video. And so, which is often not talked about, the impact on this.
And of course, that's why we're all here in the people development team, is to, you know, people can just talk to us about a dynamic, and we can give them all the available options that are there that could help them either as a group or the leader kind of figure out what's the first step, you know, to kind of start addressing this.
Wow. So can you walk us through like an abbreviated of the 8 rules?
Yeah.
We're here. Can't believe we're at this point.
Yeah, I know.
But
you know, and the thing I want to emphasize, you know, to our audience is that this abbreviated version does not substitute for attending the class, reading the articles, or watching these videos, because I'm going to give the very, very brief one, more kind of as a teaser, but to give people an idea what each of the 8 are about. So, you know, it seems like a long time ago that we did the first one.
Yeah.
But it was begin with the end in mind. And again, all this information is available. But in a nutshell, it's really about how you enter. It's like the self-fulfilling prophecy. How you enter a conflict will dictate, in most cases, how it's going to play out.
Yeah.
The more centered you are, the more focused you are, the more you know what you want out of the discussion, the more you have a greater chance of getting it and not getting caught up in all the dynamics that might occur while you're having this conversation. And so the bottom line of begin with the end in mind is know what your desired outcome is in a conversation and stay focused on that. No matter if the person, you know, derails the conversation, keep going back to what you need or what your desired outcome of that conversation is, and then you'll have a much greater chance of being successful in it, as opposed to just walking in free flow, let's just talk, I don't know where is this going to go. Then you're more susceptible, you know, to get off track and to go down different pathways that might not be beneficial.
And all those details that people focus on the process versus the issue, and then that's where emotion also ramps up.
Yeah, so be very, very focused on what you want, and then just concentrate on that. The second one, your favorite, which I think is probably one of the best in-service ones to do, which would be called stay off the ladder. The ladder of influence. Now, in the video, we have an actual diagram of a ladder, and the idea behind the ladder is it really highlights how quickly we make assumptions and jump to conclusions with limited information based on our own biases and history, whether it's with a person or with an experience or with a dynamic. And the reason why this one's important is because what happens when you climb the ladder is you make you have an impression, it turns into a judgment, eventually turns into an action. And what's missing in that whole dynamic is the other person's input, you know, the more objective side of what's going on. And you really need to hear both sides before you, you know, take any kind of action. So the ladder is a metaphor which kind of helps you realize you're going up the ladder, stop yourself, go down, and the way you go down is by getting the rest of the information that's missing, so that you don't become judge and jury by yourself and then sentence the person through an action.
That's right.
And it's a way of turning an unconscious process, because we all go up the ladder, into a conscious process where you start seeing yourself going up the ladder, and then all of a sudden you can coach yourself down and then get the other point of view before you move forward. It's a very, very respectful way to go through conflict. And a lot of us, especially if there's emotion involved, shoot up the ladder really quick. And it's hard to even catch yourself. And so that's why you've got to develop a mindfulness around that process, so you can catch yourself before you take an action, because you can never take an action back. That's the ladder.
Yeah.
The third one is called Choose Your Style, and this is based on the Thomas Kilmann work, which is 5 conflict styles. And the reason why this is important is because, similar to the ladder, we all have an autopilot response, a style that we just learned growing up. In my cases, kind of modeled my mother's conflict style, which I can tell you 75% of the time is not an effective style for the kind of conflicts I might find myself in, but it's my autopilot response.
I think we all can relate to those in our lives.
And that's the thing about these 5 styles, is it only works if you're mindful of, here's the situation, here's, of the 5 styles, the one that would best address this situation. That's keeping you in control, and you're being mindful, and you're selecting the style that will get to resolution. But if you don't kind of have that mindfulness, that one style, that your go-to style will be your defense reaction. That's what will come out. And very often it's not the style to meet the situation, and as a result the conflict just gets worse, and you just tumble down another road. It's just not effective.
And what I like about that is all of the 5 styles can be effective.
Yeah, they all have pros and cons.
Right, even avoiding.
Yeah.
As we talked about in that video. So I would encourage you to look at that.
Avoiding or forcing, the other extreme.
Right.
There is a time and place when that makes sense.
Yep. And that's a common misunderstanding, I think, that they think, well, no, you'd never do that, or you always do that. And that's not the case.
Yeah. So the fourth one is called Take the Initiative. And basically, this one is really about take the ego out of the conflict. And it doesn't matter in this rule who should go first to apologize. That's kind of an ego thing. Who's right or wrong? That's an ego thing. If they started it, therefore they should be the one to apologize. That's an ego thing. If they are bigger than you, or if they are even willing to talk to you, none of that matters. Because the fact of the matter is, if you're feeling tension in a dynamic with somebody, you're wearing the conflict. You're essentially, you've put it on. You're carrying the burden, per se. And what this rule is about is you have a responsibility, first and foremost, to yourself, to unburden yourself. So let go of the ego. If you feel the tension, initiate the conversation, regardless who should or shouldn't, or who's right or who's wrong, so that you can unburden yourself. And the benefit of doing that is you're also conditioning the dynamic, the situation, that you're going to stand up for yourself in all situations, and you're not going to get caught up in any of that righteousness. It's really about, I'm feeling tension. Can we talk it out? I want to unburden myself so that you're taking care of yourself physically, spiritually, emotionally, all those dynamics. And that way you can be whole, and you're role modeling effective conflict resolution, because you're not letting anything fester. And that's what Rule 4 is about. Rule 5 is about focus out before focusing in. And in a nutshell, what that means is your greatest conflict resolution skill and your greatest conflict resolution strategy is your ability to listen and to try and understand the conflict from the other person's point of view first. It's strategic. It also makes sense on multiple ways. And what it involves is active listening, which we all do. We all know how to do it. A lot of us don't do it enough. But basically, when you're able to let somebody else first talk about a dynamic with you, what it does is it allows them to vent, of course. It provides clarity for you because you're hearing their perspective on what the issue is. So that's, in some cases, new insight. Because when we go up the ladder, we're not involving them, right?
Right.
As you can start to see how these interact with the other rules.
Yeah.
It validates the other party's concern. And what I mean by that is when someone is respectfully listening to you, it validates what they're saying. It doesn't mean that you agree.
Right.
But it means that what they're saying is important. It shows that you're willing to collaborate just by listening, because you're not interrupting, you're not saying, yeah, but you're letting them go first. It helps diffuse their anger because they're feeling validated, so they're calming down as they're talking because you're actually interested in what they have to say. It allows you time because now you're hearing their whole side of the story, which is really how to use the ladder effectively. Then you can then decide kind of how to respond because now you have all the information. And then you can respond because you're coming from an informed perspective. So all of that comes from that whole concept of focusing out means focusing on them first before focusing on you. It's the most effective way you could resolve a conflict. Rule 6 is ask for what you need. And all of these, we had stories and things and examples. But in a nutshell, what this is there's kind of 3 levels of conflict. That people might see. There's the emotional level, there's the actual issue that's causing the conflict, and then there's a need, in most cases an unmet need, that actually is being triggered. And when a need is not being met, like feeling respected or feeling heard or feeling validated, then all of a sudden it creates the issue. And if the issue isn't being resolved, it can create the emotion. And so a lot of people address conflict on the emotional by yelling at each other, or they might go to the issue level, which is, you do this and I don't like when you do that. But the truth is, if you really want to resolve it, if it's a relationship that matters, a guy in the street, it wouldn't be worthwhile having a conversation about the needs not being met. But a relationship that matters, that's the only way to truly get resolution, is to talk about how you need to feel respected and what that would look like. And if it doesn't get to that point, you're only putting a Band-Aid on the problem. Like I said, maybe that's good enough for a relationship that you don't have a lot of interaction with, but if it's someone that matters, that's the level you need to get to. And when we do conflict mediations, oftentimes the ultimate goal is to find out what's driving the conflict, not the issue per se, but even deeper, which is what need is not being met and how to get that need met. And so in that session, we talked about a lot of ways to have that conversation so that you can get a need met. And it's also very similar to the process called managing up. And so people can get a double benefit out of watching that one. And Rule 7 is called managing the how and the what. And basically what that was is how you behave and interact, the dynamics itself, greatly impact what's being said, right? So that what happens a lot in conflict is people are more focused on being right in the what part of the conflict, like what's wrong, and they don't manage how they're showing up face to face or in that dynamic or in that email with all capital letters, or they're not managing that part of it. And the truth is, the how is more important because the how sets the stage for people to feel comfortable in the presence of each other to have the what conversation. And so that lesson was really about making sure you're managing the how so that the what becomes a slam dunk. Because if I feel like I can trust you and I feel safe in your presence, we can talk about any sensitive issue. If I don't feel that way because you're standing, you got that vein in your neck, you're pointing your finger, the how is screwed up, so the what is going to be skewed because I'm barely going to listen to the what because I don't feel safe.
And that is so classic. Certainly a lot of the people that I work with and we work with throughout the department, when people have been hurt or upset, the focus is almost always on the how, and then it comes to the what, or they'll start with the what, like they made this decision I disagreed with, but the majority of the conversation is, how they were treated, how they were communicated with.
Yeah, right.
All zeros back
Yeah.
in on that.
It just
And
shows
so-
you how significant
Mhm.
that is. And
Mhm.
a dynamic we showed in the show was these circles. Like typically what happens if you're not managing the how, it's like you got these two circles of energy going at each other, and it feels like
Mhm.
you're attacking me personally, even though it's a work issue, because you're not treating me in a respectful way. And then what we showed is this third circle, which is now if the how is being managed, it's not about that person as a person, it's about a particular behavior or an issue. So then you both sit here and then the issue's here and you both look up trying to resolve the issue where the relationship is not in question.
Right.
Or the focus is
Right.
really on that. And that's when the how is working. Because then you don't have to worry about the relationship. You focus on the issue and it's much easier. But if the how is not working, now every essence of you is being attacked.
Yeah.
And it's a totally different dynamic.
That's
And then the last one, of course, is one we talked about today. And the bottom line of that one is create a container around the group or the department or the team that has expectations about how to have conflict, how to have it, but in a very constructive, supportive way where there's some peer pressure to do it effectively. And all of a sudden, people start managing their own conflicts, and the leader doesn't have to worry as much, just support that process.
That's right.
And then it can be a win-win for everybody.
That's right. Well, just a couple other questions here with your time. If someone watching this or any of these in the series has an issue with a coworker or anyone, where might they start? Where might you recommend they start?
Because I know it's a lot of information. I would say first thing would be with a coaching session, be with any one of us in the people development team, to kind of talk it through, because that's probably the most effective thing they could do. Because then they're slowly separating the emotion from the issue itself, and then it's easier to come up with options. So that would be, I would say, the first choice. Now, if they didn't want to do that and they just wanted to base it on the videos, I would probably watch video 2, stay off the ladder first, because that kind of helps them get more perspective of have they received all the information they need to move forward. Then maybe rule 4, which was take the initiative, because if it's bothering you, don't wait. Don't get caught up in the ego game. And then maybe the other rules are kind of more of the mechanics of how to have the conversation itself. But so I would start probably with rule 2 and then rule 4 in that sense, and that might be the best way. Or to ask for a copy of all the articles.
And they can get
Just
that
email
right
me.
from you. Okay.
Put it in a PDF document, and they can go through it that way if they want.
That's good to know that this is available. So definitely, I encourage you to reach out to Greg and to the rest of us in the people development team, and we can help facilitate getting that to everyone.
Yeah. So there's plenty of ways to do this.
One thing you mentioned, the conversation itself. The how and the what and that process. It seems that's where we all start focusing on immediately.
Yeah.
How am I going to tell this? How am I going to say this to someone? But the previous steps really is the homework to provide the structure to be able to do that.
Yeah, and keep in mind
Makes that
too,
easier.
if your coworkers, if you're friends with your coworkers, there's a danger in that. Your tendency is probably to go to Paul, your best friend, at work, and go, "Can you believe what Charlie did?" And start building a case. And what you're doing is, because there's no third side yet established, so he's going to support you in terms of, "Yeah, you're right. What an idiot. You should say something." And then if you're like, "I'm not going to say anything," okay, well, whatever. There's no accountability around that, and then it just turns dysfunctional right off the bat. That's why you kind of need to see all 8 of these to be able to figure out for yourself or for your department or for your team, where do we start? Because if the third side is in place, I guarantee you, people will figure out which of the other rules, how to go about them, because the third side won't allow them to do anything but constructively address it. And actually, now that I say that, that's probably one of the more important ones.
That's a great point. A nice way to wrap that up.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yes,
I mean,
thank
this
you.
is the demand we have and the questions
Mm-hmm.
with conflict is significant. We're a large, complicated organization, and so this kind of resource in your background is very important. So much appreciated.
Yeah,
So,
and hope
reach out.
everybody watches these and takes full advantage.
Yeah, definitely. And so, with that, while conflict is never easy, hopefully this series and the various resources we have will make it at least a bit easier for you to use your words, take the initiative or lean into it. At least making that a bit easier and providing a little more comfort when you're doing so. And as always, the people development team, we're here to support and to bounce ideas and concerns off. So with that, the rules are there, and thank you for watching, and we will be coming back at you with more in our series of Fridays at Noon. Thanks very much.